Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest today is Anand Dwivedi. He is a senior data scientist at ICE. Welcome to the show for the second time.
Oh, thanks you. Thanks for having me back. Last time was so much fun.
Yeah.
I always love having these interesting, crazy discussions
Yeah,
with people. So yeah, happy to be back.
very cool. We'll jump right into machine learning. What's the craziest thing you learned how to do in the last week or last month in regards to machine learning?
In the last months, things have been like I have been truly more intrigued by these newer models that now, like GPT-4o, that processes everything together, is now such a
What do, what
fascinating.
do you mean processes everything together?
So they previously generally were people were translating between tokens, right? Like image got into tokens, then those image tokens got transferred into either text tokens, video tokens, and doing these translations from one to the other. GPT-4o, and I've been like learning a lot about it still because there's so much always going on, being one of the initial models to truly process all of the three types at the same time. So imagine text of a dog, video of a dog, voice of a dog, all of the tokens being processed at the same time for the models to
Oh,
train on, is a different strategy than what the world was in before, where people just had the large language model, which was just language into tokens. And then they did language to images, language to sound. So in that way, models now processing, like getting closer to how we process all sensory inputs
wow.
together. Like the GPT-4o, essentially they made the claim that they have trained that 4o model and mixture of experts using that technology. So I've been trying to use to see how different it is from uh, GPT-4. Like so many people are trying it out, and does that have a difference in its ability to do one type of tasks or the other? But now, like from at least the last conversation we had, and I truly think about is like, have more things become novel? But because of this GPU grab of all big resources, truly like allocating a lot of it with them, I feel we've reached an interesting space where we're still trying to figure out how these technologies will get more impacted, but has nothing been so mind-blowing to be like, oh wow, the
Yeah,
dynamic again is going to shift again.
yeah, that's the craziest thing because that's if there's this graph where it said that 2020 it went up to 2023 and that's when GPT-3 and it feels like it's flatlined in terms of that original like wow factor of just like oh wow this is something new and now it feels like the integration of that something new with instead of more something news it's now just the integration of those something that one big something into the whole rest of the thing, right?
Oh yeah, and Apple's intelligence is like
Mm.
the announcement Apple made yesterday was like truly one big first step of truly like making it part of the OS, which I always like. That's how I felt that it will make the biggest impact. And it's so nice to see Apple Intelligence take that step. But of course, it has more flat, like, there are positive and negative responses for
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and we'll get into the negative maybe as well. But what does it mean that Apple Intelligence is making it part of the OS?
So you will be able to ask more questions to like you will have a assistant be part of the actual operating systems, like change my
Oh,
settings to dark light, where
oh,
should I find these settings, etc., etc. You want to do change things to your phone. Like Apple announced that it will be able to proofread any of your emails, and they're claiming it to happen on, like, Apple has always claimed that it does on device versus offline machine intelligence. So it's doing a
yeah.
lot of like good basic intelligence on the device itself, like proofreading devices, proofreading images. They want to be privacy centered. So they are making that case by saying this request is not going to a server somewhere. It runs on your Mac itself to give you a summarized email answer instead of, it fetching, going to some place, they doing something with it, and it coming back. So that I felt was a step in the positive direction.
But people are worried about that particular as well, though, right? Because that's the
Oh
negative.
yeah.
That is that because if you don't trust Apple, then like having it go through all of your machine could be like, well, what is the negative there?
It's it's always is like this discussion, I feel, has always been at every change of technology. Like, for example, the way we use Wi-Fi and the amount of
Mm,
packets.
mm.
Are you now questioning that this Wi-Fi device is around me all the damn time? No, it's a primary, like, food, clothing, shelter, and
Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi has become the primary needs of humanity
Wait, I want to
now.
dig into that because you skipped over the Wi-Fi and the packets. What do you mean by the Wi-Fi and the packets?
It's just more like being able to, like, our ISPs, the routers that we use have a lot of information about
Oh,
the ways in which we access the internet itself. Like,
yeah.
it's, we truly, sure, we can layer up and do a lot of different things about it, but the amount of digital footprint as a human that we have started to generate post 2010 is like astronomical. Like, I was very interested even in like iOS releases, which I was so curious. Is like a lot of the OS releases now have become on how you can relive your digital footprint that you create more efficiently.
Uh,
Then allowing me to be like, oh, go this, do this completely new experience that we could have not done in the past. It's more, hey, you created all these digital footprint, come and relive memories in multiple unique ways, which I feel is such a huge shift in humanity's way, right? Like, our parents generation had only, like, earlier generation only had snapshots, which were photos to remember a memory.
oh,
A
interesting. Okay,
blank.
got it. Yeah. So it's essentially like our all of our computation. So what happened in the 2010s that allowed all of these digital footprints to be memorialized in a way where our previous generation only had they could only take a photo of something happening. What happened
So
in the
that's where
2010s? Yeah.
social media and the
Oh, got
internet
it.
exposure,
Okay. Yeah.
both, like, the social media aspect was to encourage people to share more. We got more and more cameras to help record stuff. And even then, if you look at it, you truly had restrictions on storage because you had to buy hard drives, they would go wrong, right? It was truly not that easy to relive a past special
Yes.
event.
Yes, interesting.
Yeah, now with the cloud, like, they, everything is look back your past week, look back your past month, look back 2021,
Yeah.
look back someone else's 2021.
Yeah, interesting. And it's that process now tying it back into AI now that we're going to have an on-device processing agent on device able to do all these different things, not only do different things within the computer, but it's probably also going to a lot of people are going to try to record everything and there's a lot of privacy stuff there, but I think it's definitely going to, we're recording this conversation. I now generally try to record all of my conversations because if I record them, then I can put them into AI and that'll just get more and more seamless. And so we're going to be able to capture everything that's happening and maybe even beyond our human senses as well, like because soon, well, this gets into the sort of transhuman thing as well, is like once we get the AI, once we get the robots, and then we have new ways of allowing humans to have different senses through this AI bot. Have you thought about these types of things at all?
So Neuralink is
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
has the positive and the negative use case for it, which, for people who truly do not like miss an important sensory
Yes. Yeah.
input right now, it's wonders.
Yeah. Yeah.
To
When the
level the playing field,
yeah.
it's going to change a lot of things and help them there, even for people who have neurodegenerative issues, injuries, where part like supplementing and supporting them becomes such a very good use case. But yeah, enhancing performance
In
becomes
somebody
a
who's
different
healthy.
animal.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody who's healthy. And then that's not to mention just like all the crazy things that happen. Like when you're using Neuralink, you're now, I assume that you've given direct brain interface in a client server relationship to a company, like directly into your brain. I guess we already do that with Facebook, which is like, we're already giving Facebook all of our social data, and like some negative things happen, but it's not the end of the world. And I guess a direct brain interface, that's not going to be too much change. But then there's still that kind of thing of just like, how much do we give to these companies, in order to, like, how much does that change our lives the more that we give to these companies? This is why I'm very interested in distributed systems and permissionless distributed systems like Urbit. What any thoughts there?
That's like Adobe is bringing a very interesting conversation there, right? Like,
Mm.
where if you look at Adobe, what they said is anything in their cloud is permissible
Yeah.
for them to do whatever they want.
And is that so they can train models? Did they do that in order so they can train
it's
models?
it could, like, as you mentioned, because we will have digital footprint and digital footprint over time, of course that information becomes more and more helpful. Like previously, if you truly looked at the only system in which we relied so much on having all information documented was finance, right?
Oh,
Like
interesting.
exchanges, mortgages, credit card, everything is
For
documented and
quite some
has
time.
been documented for quite a lot of time
Yeah.
without not even thinking about, like, it's a standard, no one questions it. You understand the aspects of it, as well as to why it's required, why it's not required.
Yeah.
Now that's starting to become the norm
For
for
everything.
everything,
Yeah.
right? Like all of our, like, previously, even if you look within finance, there was a big chunk that was cash based,
Uh-huh.
which still had buffers and there were inconsistencies, but now everything is a swipe or a tap.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
COVID helped accelerate it to the point that cash is really, really out
Yeah. Except in
of the
Argentina where
system.
except in Argentina where I am, which is really funny because of I mean, everybody uses digital payments here as well. But the fact that the currency is crazy inflating, it means that everybody actually, there's the most physical US dollars outside of the United States here in Argentina, because nobody wants to save in their pesos. So even though the digital peso is basically digital, the only people who can't use the digital pesos are foreigners who live here like me. And so we have to use cash. But for most Argentines, they're using digital pesos, but then they're saving in physical dollars because the government won't let them save in in digital dollars. And so they're saving in physical dollars underneath their mattress. But Argentina is just like this strange place that is defying all the global norms. But yeah, the rest of the world, as you mentioned, the cash thing. Let's figure out the categories of all the things that are changing to appear more like finance. Because we got our memories, we got our social relationships, we've got.
Cybersecurity, like internet access, of course.
Can you go more into what do you mean by cybersecurity?
Like being able to, like the case that you were making about distributed systems, like imagine if in a VPN currently everyone had distributed systems in which you won't be able to understand where one is coming from.
Oh,
In the case of the freedom and use of responsibilities, it becomes a very good case, but it also becomes a breeding ground for bad actors to
uh,
just use that system to act negatively. And that is like, I have had these discussions with even like trading in a centralized and a non-centralized way. It's like financial crimes in themselves, like cybersecurity, are billion-trillion-dollar businesses that can have huge impacts on important critical infrastructures.
Wait. I want to make sure I'm understanding what you said. You said financial crimes themselves are cybersecurity businesses.
No, it's like financial crimes like cybersecurity. Like if you create this distributed layer, which is untraceable, people can access this global network of things, it becomes a breeding ground for cybersecurity and financial criminals, right? Like
got it.
It's there is a very thin line between wanting all freedom and everyone. Like the statement that I made the last time is like, it's not the users of the system that cause the problem, it's the abusers of the system that can negatively damage all good that has been created. So both those worlds, I get the case of being closer to finance, because they are slowly like, companies don't invest in their cybersecurity right now, but they are such an important fundamental use case. Like how investments are required in clothing and like food, cybersecurity has now become that, with all governments everywhere heavily treating it not like a cost center, but more like
what do they call
need.
What they treat it as a revenue center? The big companies, the governments, because you mentioned that like cybersecurity isn't being used by a lot of companies, but I imagine that you were referring to mid-market,
yes,
smaller
you're right.
companies,
Bigger companies, yes.
And go for it. Yep.
Yeah, I was like, let's see them as data controllers and then users of the data. The data controllers know that they need to heavily invest. We have US data laws, GDPR laws, multiple laws now on data controllers to do this.
Yeah.
But if someone's not a controller, but just an accessor of information, like for example, Cambridge Analytica, like that famous case that happened, Cambridge Analytica is not a data controller.
Yeah. Got it.
Facebook
is. Facebook was the data controller. Cambridge Analytics came in and used, and they're not under GDPR. They're not under the regulations, so they were able to basically, they don't have the same level of demand. It's so interesting. Such an interesting. It's so interesting how what we're talking about is the digital and the physical worlds colliding basically now.
Yep.
And the digital world is going to create just like so much more opportunity than the physical world. Like it does seem like,
and also more evidence. You're very right. Opportunity, yes, but now all of our evidence is digital world. Right? Like we're sort of now in the realm of this every evidence ever possessed.
Yes.
Now is slowly moving towards digital points.
Yes.
While we live in this, like our existence of this physical world exists.
But and then there's another thing, which is the LLMs are now coming in, and previous evidence, what we considered evidence, which would be a video, is now no longer considered evidence. So like some things, we're getting new forms of evidence for a lot of things. We're definitely getting tracers of things, but at the same time, we now have this technology that's like magical realism, basically. That's like going to shift our understanding of what evidence is. Is that accurate?
It's an interesting thought experiment, very similar to like how movies like changing your perception of the reality that happened in the world. It's very similar to that exact statement. Like a lot of people would not ever go through all the details of the Oppenheimer experiments and the things that happen, but would learn from it, from the movie itself, and quote it. While the reality of the events that happened at that point in time are scattered, fragmented, spread across and will be very hard to collate. And that's what raises multiple views, different options, etc., etc. It's like that's the physical digital collision with the physical world started with that, with like TV, videos. It truly started with that
Yeah, interesting.
thing happening. Like newspapers, everyone was like, oh, this is just one way. We need more newspapers. Somehow we thought more data points are going to help us get closer to the truth. Now it becomes an interesting question of like, is that truly the case? Like these LLM trainings, like if
Yeah.
you train, do you truly are more closer to the truth if you trained on more number of tokens? That
Well, I don't know.
experiment
What
did
do you think?
not feel correct, right? Like
Yeah,
people
yeah.
trained it on gazillion number of tokens,
Yeah. And
and the
you know
number of
something,
tokens didn't translate.
so you know something about this. So have in the LLM training, what have we learned from training these foundational models? And do you know anything about how they're adapting to that? So like, is it, so I imagine from what you just said, it is not true that the more tokens we get, the more accurate things become, right?
Yep.
So that's not true. And is do you know? And this might be behind closed doors, but is OpenAI or is Mistral or any of these guys have they shifted their strategy in terms of trying to get more accurate training?
Yeah, that's where the reinforcement loop of the human feedback. Like that's why I have always been a proponent of the human being in the loop,
Yeah, I got it. Yeah,
guiding
yeah, yeah, yeah,
discussions. Like
yeah,
everyone's trying to make it like Mistral started its own chat. OpenAI, of course, has its own chat. Gemini wants it to be usable everywhere.
yeah.
Like the meta strategy of let's give the baseline weight models open, but let people use it so that they can come back with the question answers and the tokens that worked.
Oh, interesting. So yeah, yeah, I already knew this that ChatGPT was released not to give this technology out, but it was released so that OpenAI could better train its model using the truth or
Yeah, or how
with user
people
feedback.
use it,
Yeah.
right? Like that's with all knowledge, that is the question, right? Like knowledge in itself, like are like the weights of that LLM, 254 billion. When you ask the query to the knowledge, get response back and say, in my case or in multiple people's case, this knowledge was relevant and useful
Yeah,
versus
got
this
it.
knowledge was
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
What truly changes, even in humans, is what's changing between a good and a bad lawyer. It's not that all lawyers classes made you a good, useful lawyer. All of you, like your neural networks pre-trained through the same tokens. When we went to college, people picked up way different stuff
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
them. And yeah, these LLMs now are in that phase itself, whereas the knowledge that you take from those billions of parameters being the questions and interactions that you ask, the questions and interactions that I ask. Like
Yeah.
I essentially was talking to a
Ooh.
friend of mine who is a registered nurse.
Yeah.
She found it so useful that she could structure some bad news to their
Oh,
patients in
interesting.
a way that is really, really helpful, not, and places it in a non-neutral format very, very quickly for them. I can like the benefit of that is so insane in just
Mm.
communication, like making the right communication at that point in time versus me asking it all these crazy questions about different lores,
Yeah.
this, that, and the other. So
This
some
is
use cases are so useful. It's amazing
this
to be able to do that.
this gets into really interesting territory because I think our last conversation was really focused on this about learning, how humans learn and how LLMs learn. And it's making me think what you just said is that, we're all using this technology in very different ways based on our experience in the same way that we use knowledge. And
Yep.
I've been starting to call this not artificial intelligence, but artificial knowledge, synthetic knowledge, like and the interesting thing is that what you just made me think about is variability the reason why humans are so, we have like two layers of variability. We have genetic variability, which allows us to have individual biological kind of things. All we share that with other animals. And then we have cultural variability, which is somehow in some sort of misunderstood way or not understood way, also like somehow related to genetics as well, but feels very different. And that culture thing seems really relevant. And it goes back to the augmentation conversation as well, because like it feels like AI is like definitely not artificial intelligence. It feels like intelligence augmentation, because I'm now able to study these things. It's completely revolutionized my study practices. I'm now studying things in various different fields, and I'm using spaced repetition to basically allow me to just establish a sort of beachhead in all these different domains, which then I take back into the podcast and I start interviewing people in these various domains. And it's just really interesting. What do you think on that, on the variability, the genetics, like knowledge, synthetic knowledge type of thing?
So I would call it like a more moving dynamic library.
Ooh.
Like it's truly super smart, super smart librarian that can access a pages of books to get you that answer. Like librarians, I spoke to so many of them because that got me very interested in the actual librarian job and the whole degree
Oh,
of
interesting.
like knowledge transversal. Like there is a whole degree of them knowing areas, sections of the books, sections of writers that would be very good at. Like that's what librarians have played such a huge role in knowledge retrieval in ages.
Wait, let's go into that, because that's so what does a librarian do?
Like librarians, if you ask them about topics, they know specific authors, specific books, specific sections of the books, either in their library, someone else's library, but they know the high level area in which you should look at to get more deep, detailed
So
knowledge that you
they
wanted.
have the meta knowledge that
Yep,
allows the person coming to seek the knowledge to find the knowledge. And
exactly.
what I'm getting from you is that as an LLM is basically a synthetic librarian.
Yeah. That's how I
Yeah,
envision it more than like it can also give me pages, right? Like it
yeah,
can
yeah,
summarize that page
yeah.
for me and refer it. I've added that summarization aspect also in it based on the question I asked them. And I love like for some reason I've been going to collect like old books, and I still meet like I went to Powell's library in Oregon. It is like one of the biggest libraries, like a whole block is a library full of old new books. And I was just talking to the librarian there,
Uh,
asking them about like different poets. Like I was very interested in Tagore,
uh-huh.
and I was like, oh, but are there different other poets, Japanese poets? And from like she, of course, could guide me specifically in the sections, but because she's read books, she was like, oh, you like these poets? Maybe you should check out these other poets. And that is essentially LLMs. Like you don't see it that way, but that's the knowledge transversal and like just fetching the knowledge comes in. You brought up a very interesting point about like culture, right? Like,
Yeah,
of course, genetics play a part.
yeah.
The cultural part truly comes in feedback, right? Like the feedbacks that you got when you did certain tasks
Yes.
in your culture, community, family, very different than the feedbacks I got in my culture, different family. So that is truly feedback to our neural networks
Yeah, interesting.
of changing, and we unlearn and learn those feedbacks all the damn time, right? Like there are some feedbacks that I would have gotten which are from the age of 21 or 20 or 19 when I'm more mature. I can of course unlearn those feedbacks more quickly and adapt to them, because here the feedbacks on those things are going to be different, there the feedbacks are going to be different, but the feedbacks you truly got in your formative years
Yeah,
that shaped core
yeah,
parts of
yeah,
the weights,
yeah,
like
yeah,
that's
yeah.
in
Interesting.
generally the weights of the network. They say the higher layers have the most
Oh,
impact, and then like as you keep on going lower and lower, like that was in a deep neural network before, where it was like the first initial couple of layers of your inputs mattered. Like the weights in the first initial layers mattered a lot.
Interesting. Can we
And
get
stored a lot of knowledge than the weights that are at the lower end of the network. People tried to freeze the upper layers, only change the lower layers. People still do these experiments of freezing some of the weights. But what I got from that is like, when we were starting out from baseline weights, considering as kids, no feedback, right? Like we cry all the damn time to get
no
some sort of a
language?
feedback to be like, don't cry, cry, etc., etc. Like the feedbacks in those formative years truly is for culture surrounding weather impacted us like quite a lot in terms of how we generally behaved in some circumstances. And then as your brain, of course, matured on top of those layers, right? Like you build up the motor skills, the sports that you learned are built up on your, like when people say it's like I read so many athletes to be like, oh, I feel I was born to do this sport. Well, like if you look at Verstappen or Hamilton doing sports when they were 6, 7 years old,
Yeah.
their brains truly grew around the sport,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what they were trying to optimize. Like reaction timings is what they were trying to optimize even then when they were playing that sport. And sure, they were learning other stuff, but heavy load of your brains, like the number of repetitions that they did then changed. Like I was listening to Federer's speech very recently. Even he was like, oh, I used to play multiple sports around 10, 12. Again, very growth formative years. When hormones change, your growth is again
Oh.
pumped up into steroids. So your brain becomes so much fluid in terms of its neuroplasticity at those points in time that you can like channel it to whatever areas that you want to get really, really better at and see very quick results because your brain's growing at that point in time. You're giving it explicit feedback and going through those hardships, which now, like I'm still practicing yoga so much to gain flexibility. I was like one of my cousins visited me very recently. She's like 15.
Uh,
She can do a full split without even thinking about it.
yeah.
And I, let's say I'm far away
Yeah.
from where that is going to be. But I was like, it's amazing that you're currently pushing your brain to do that. It gets very hard at age 30 when I'm trying to teach my leg muscles to stretch more
Mm.
as much as I want them to.
That is really interesting. There's a lot of different stuff we can go into from this. The kind of the most applicable. I've started cooking school down here in Argentina, so I'm going to cooking school, and I know less than nothing about cooking. I'm an active bad influence in the kitchen, and I'm not really doing this for a university degree in cooking, although everyone else is doing it. They're all Argentine. It's all in Spanish. And I'm like actively causing problems in there. Like today, I put like a too much of one particular thing, and I ruined the sesame seeds, and like that's happening every time. And I'm rolling with it because I'm very interested in learning this skill. But I'm at a 2-year-old, 1-year-old level, and I'm 38 trying to learn this skill in another language, in another culture. That's one part. That cultural part is the other part, which is that I'm now past the point at which I'm past the honeymoon phase of living in Argentina. It's past the last couple of weeks where I've gone from this like, oh, I love everything about it, to it's like, oh, this is just home now because this is like my long-term home. And so now, given that rosy picture of Argentine culture, now that that's disillusioned me, and I still very much like Argentine culture, but it's now giving me access to the deeper layers of their culture and analyzing like all the different things that are going on in these simple interactions. And the cooking school is a perfect opportunity to learn all this different stuff because food is so fundamental to Argentines since they're all Italian. Most of them are Italian. And so it's just wild thinking about this cultural thing and what you're talking about. As you were talking about the neuroplasticity in like your 15-year-old cousin and you as a 30-year-old, I'm wondering if genetic engineers, because I've started to dive into genetic engineering because a recent podcast episode that I just published on Friday we talked about how these LLMs are going to lead soon to large action models, and then they're going to lead to generative biology and generative chemistry, meaning that we're going to be able to generate DNA, generate biology in the same way that we're actually generating large language. But it could be 10 years down the line until that happens, but it does feel like that's happening. And I'm wondering if anybody's, I guess psychedelics do a bit of this, but the neuroplasticity in adults, because like the idea that we lose our neuroplasticity is false, but there is definitely a scale that we lose, and I believe it's around the age of 25 where we're not able to do it as well as if we're doing it younger. But I'm learning Russian right now, and it's definitely probably slower than if I had learned it when I was like 20, which is where I did pick up languages as an adult, and so I do know that I was able to do that. So it's probably slower than that. But at the same time, I'm also much more efficient because I have wisdom as it relates to learning languages. So I'm able to learn. I know how to learn better as I get older. Do you happen to know if they're doing anything in that? Are you familiar with this world of genetic engineering? Are you studying that at all?
So I'm following discussions.
Yeah.
I will familiarity
Yeah,
gets into a
expertise, familiarity.
very
It's a hard thing to pin down.
to say. It's like that conversation, what you brought up is like, it's a very interesting area of being able to like drug discovery and applications of being able to form new proteins and like filter out bad experiments is what it's truly like very, very helpful with, is what I would say. And that's the area that it will always get like better into. But I essentially have changed. I think when you bring in neuroplasticity, that's one of the differences. Like we are just thinking of our brain as the neural network. It's not, right? Like neurons are everywhere into our body. So it's not that just, yes, you're talking about the cognitive neuroplasticity, but your physical neuroplasticity is
also a factor,
is slowing than a 15-year-old or a 12-year-old. Because you're like, those neurons are not as plastic. I mean, they can still remain plastic if you keep on giving them those feedbacks and everything. But like, that's the people, like I also made the mistake, which I had to, like, yoga helped me do that, because it forces you to treat the whole body as one unit, which is it's like we're not just thinking from our brain. There is no separation as the brain. Everything's thinking and giving you feedback at all points in time. We just care about the chatter and the imaginary words of the brain as the feedback. We truly ignore most of the other feedbacks that we get. So in my sister's case, in that case, I feel it's like, sure, my neuroplasticity of my brain could be at the same speed, but she can, if she sort of, like how in yoga you say, push the sensation there, feel it, and then try and loosen it up, stretching it a bit more. Like in her case, I truly believe her muscles there are like, the feedback chain is much more faster to create, generate, and break down than in our cases. And more with our sedentary lifestyle, we are truly like, the only signal that I do my hip is put your legs like this. Only signal to my hands for 8 hours of the day is they need to be straight, fingers need to work the most, while there is no other signal going on.
And this gets into this gets back into the Neuralink stuff too, because I only recently figured out, Elon Musk likes to have points. Part of it's marketing, but he also likes to have reasons why he does things. So the reason why he built the rocket ship that just landed itself is like, well, we need rocket ships that can land themselves in order to get to Mars. And then so Neuralink has the same motivation, and I only recently figured out the motivation for Neuralink, which is that in the existential AI battle that he sees coming, that Neuralink, something like that, is the only opportunity for us to come to the same level as the intelligent machines and play on a leveling playing field. right? So it's like that the only way to survive in that scenario is to actually hook the AI directly into our brains, which seems like maybe not the most thought out thing, because then, you know, like, but it's like you can't stop it. I'm not going to try. I'm not a Luddite. I can't stop it. So it's like maybe it is that old thing of like, if you can't fight them, become them or whatever. But the sedentary part, it's so interesting because now so much of our lives are in this knowledge world, and this knowledge world is inside the computer, and our physical bodies are just like artifacts of the past. As we were talking about earlier, is this sort of physical digital world. The digital world is becoming so important that the physical world, but now the digital world is going to come out and go capture the physical world in this way that will direct brain interfaces. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, you brought up such a beautiful point about our bodies being just artifacts now, right? Like, because the only expectation that we now have from our body is don't break down. Allow me to sit on a chair for hours. If I want to walk, I should be able to walk a little bit. But that's pretty much it. We don't want anything else. If we truly went down to the optimization route, they would, or the optimization answer would be survive in as less food as possible. Right? Like, you'd be like, don't take any energy to be able to survive. And there is this interesting optimization game weirdly going on, which, like, everyone's like, oh, this existential battles and all of these aspects that come up with like the digital footprint, like all of the man-made stuff essentially that we have created are the only ever-growing things which are created by us, right? Like, the water that we have is not ever growing. Like, the total amount of water that exists on the earth is finite. It comes down, becomes salty or groundwater, but it's finite. The amount of earth or land that we have is again finite. There is infinitism in the amount of things that we can access. But all of the R things that you mentioned, right? Like data, technology, like money, assets, is in an ever-growing, always increasing function, which, like, how is like, oh, there is going to be this existential threat that, you know, AI essentially will take over, right? Like, there's so many questions of these existential things of artificial threats. We are still not tackling the more important threat that's causing us billions of dollars is climate risk. We're not tackling that. It's like, who cares, right? Like, the answer that is truly destroying homes, actively live at this point in time, disrupting societies, there is no investment being made that much. Like, there is a disparity in the investments in this ongoing live situations where we always talk about threat minimization and making it like these other objective functions. The actions, interestingly, if you measure them, like how we are measuring an LLM by rights, wrongs, these, that's, a lot of these like actions of like, oh, existentialism and safety of humanity is priority. Well, are we taking actions on improving our air quality, which is the one of the core? We can't live without air for more than 4, 5, 8 minutes, right? Like, important. We breathe it all unconsciously by every second, but did we ensure that that should not get damaged? No.
And I was at the cooking class again, and the cooking class is really funny because they use seed oils, vegetable oils. Vegetable oils are the neutral oils that they cook with, and they use them because they're neutral, so they have no taste, which is true. They don't have a taste compared to olive oil, or I guess butter also has a taste too as well, but maybe ghee doesn't have a taste. I don't know. And so basically, they're now in everything, but they're highly industrialized processed things. And then the other thing was that they were cooking with plastics, and there's a bunch of microplastics, the air quality, all these things are things like, and they're it's the threat thing is so interesting because it's like there are so many real threats and there are so many perceived threats, And then this is part of the reason why I had to leave San Francisco and Silicon Valley, is that Silicon Valley, San Francisco, although they often talk about the sort of bubbles, the intellectual bubbles they get in and how important it is to break out of those, they often talk about that. But even though they talk about it, they can't remove themselves from it. And so like the existential risk, the AI existential risk, it could be that that's a problem, but I find the way that they're thinking about it is it's just like such a giant gravity thing. But then there are all these just kind of like threats that we have in our daily lives that there's sort of no attention of. And this is an interesting conversation back for the last 10 minutes, is like the attention is a key part of these LLMs as well, right?
Yep.
We gave them attention. Actually, this would be a good question to you. Did we give them the same type of attention that we have in the human brain? And if not, how is it different? How are these attentions different?
So they got the attention of like, if you're predicting tomorrow's sales, or it like then what LLM truly does is predicts the next token or next series of tokens, right? Like it pays attention to the right set of tokens before it. Like people should understand this is like, at the very end, we are aligning the right sequences of questions and answers for it to remember, if this is the right question, this is the right answer. Like that's what it's paying attention to. What you are trying to bring is now like multi-objective problem solving. There are these so many different objectives that we have. Like even in an LLM, you can think of them as like we can train them on so many these multiple different objectives. To like one of the interesting problem statements that I want to train them is essentially train them not towards more problem solving or Q&A on knowledge of the world, but actually train them more towards just philosophical textbook and being able to get answers, calling them philosophers LLM. So you have 7 philosophers as agents, and they communicate with each other to give a sort of set of answers on some mental health problems or any problems that you think you want to solve in the world. And they will, that mixture of expert will not be trained on like...
Is character AI doing that?
I'm not sure. If people are doing it, that's amazing. Please do it.
Mixture of expert models, a mixture of expert models, but instead of like one of the agents being, you know, like a expert on finance, all 7 are philosophically trained. I like that a lot.
Yeah. So like that, you can imagine those mixture of experts will not work on like their problem statement is not summarization or being able to translate well. This, that, and the other. That's for a different model. They will be trained on like now we're getting into trying to make it more specifics like human jobs, right? Like data analyst, data engineer need same type of skill sets, but still work on slightly different problems to achieve outcomes. Like we're making them very outcome driven. And same thing with the Silicon Valley, like like it's very trying to get so much more outcome, like real time right now, stakeholder funding, this, that, or the other outcome drivens. Where
what are you proposing instead?
I like one of the ways would be number of positive impacts, like social number of people you made a positive impact on. Like this technology helped educate 500 people, 5,000 people. This technology improved healthcare habits of 1,000 people, 100,000 people, like multiple countries. Like I essentially from my lab started doing more structured like venture capital donations, where my positive is trying to impact number of borrowers in number of diverse different countries, probably coming from countries with the lowest amount of resources.
Interesting.
That's what I'm optimizing towards. Not make more money, ROI,
not IRR.
Exactly. Not any of those stuff. Not even trying to make it more nationalistic about just one country or the other or one allocation, but more be like, well, generally we can quantify as smart analysts and big data everywhere the disparity of the resources. Can it be quantified? Of course it can be. Can we direct all of the fundings to that proportion? Like, how do we do it in a hedge fund with an ETF, which is split it by market cap, put investment in this, the $1 or $100 that you put in will go, part of it will go to the company with the highest market cap. It's an instrument in finance that exists for any of the biggest countries in the world. They can donate with a similar funding instrument. On the other side, we like, these are the countries with the lowest disparity of natural resources, educational resources. You can create multiple different ETFs, like donation TFs, whatever you want to call it, and do that. Are those problems solvable? 100% they are. Why are they not being actively upon to? Because the investors are not looking for that. I mean, there are investors that are looking for that as the optimization statement, but generally, if you started a company or a startup or anything right now, what do they want to get more funding? Why do they want to get it? Because they want to increase revenue. Why do they want to increase more revenue? Because they want their startup to be at some funding level. So the optimization function, even though the claim is of help, the metrics don't support.
So that disparate resources, because it all comes in making positive impact on people's lives. I imagine that you've already put some thought into how to actually put a metric on somebody's positives on a positive. But then again, I think it would come back to humans in the loop to evaluate whether that happened. Otherwise, you might have the system be gamed. What are your thoughts on there?
You're right. Like, that's why having experts, moving experts that monitor system, like everywhere, health monitoring is good for you. Like, and like monitoring systems play that role, like monitor things. If things move wrong, move across. And like one of the metrics that I can give you is number of like Roger Federer, his foundation optimizes on number of like early stage kids that get education. Specific 3 to 5, 3 to 8 early stage education. Like same way with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? Like they're trying to do it in those specific ways. Like these companies with their CSRs, I mean, they track everything on the other side. Like they all have tracking capabilities. Why not utilize it in even your CSRs and positive impacts than being lazy and be like, I bought 500 acres of forest. Right?
What is the CSR?
Corporate social responsibility. Right? Like every country has it. Like every company wants to do it. So I'm like, you can invest a sliver of your analytics capabilities to be like, we can do more than buy 50 villages. Let's be smarter, like in allocating, like Copilot and everything. I'm pretty sure they would have some initiatives. They could have some more initiatives of providing it to like truly places, like set up Wi-Fi and everything for areas in which there is no access of education and teachers. They don't even know how to set up that computer for that long. You can now help them so much. Like that's where it's like the potential for now creating an equal ground for education is what LLM brought. Everyone has access to education now. You can't say, I can't learn this. What do you mean? You're 2 questions away. You can learn anything you want to know in the world. Like I personally feel the argument, I didn't know about this, is out of the window, because you can know about any thing in your language also.
It's such a small requirement of agency now to find out whatever you're looking for.
That's you brought up a very beautiful word, agency. It's like you and me can want to do the change. Like you are bringing up such a beautiful agency of teaching yourself like this new environment, new food, new culture in a new language. You could have said, I will just cook pasta and have chips and dips for my whole life. And you could have lived your life in a much more comfortable way. But this agency is what brings the variance
And
now.
that agency is so, because going back to that young kids, how do you teach a young kid agency? But we'll save that one for the next one. But so thank you so much for coming on the show. And do you have anything you're working on that you want to share with the audience?
I essentially, like, I have always followed, like, I've been brought up with a spiritual guru of mine. He turned 100 years old
What's his name?
this year. He's not known. Like,
Huh.
I'll send you some. Like,
Yeah.
his name is like Sachidanand is a very common
Yeah.
name in amongst like spiritual gurus of India.
Yeah.
That's how, like, everyone sort of gets like a name of a guru, which is sort of a title, but they sort of lose their identity.
Yeah.
So the beautiful thing of what I'm trying to do here is, like, I'm actually trying to train an LLM on his lectures.
Awesome.
Because he has answered, and it's a challenge because, like, all of it comes from a local Indian language, which is
Oh,
not that easy to find.
whoa. What's the
So
local language?
like, it's a combination of like Hindi, which is one of the common known language, and the language which is called Bhojpuri, which is only spoken in like the tribal parts, like one of the corners of the country. There is enough population for it, but training, there is no enough. Like, you will find a lot of, like, the beauty of LLMs, right? How many people speak French? 80 million, 100 million. There is a French model. 229 million, 200 million would be speaking this language. There is no model for that, because there is no representation of people who want to train models for that
Yeah.
specific language. So, but that's the challenge for me now. It's like I'm trying to make his knowledge accessible to someone who doesn't speak that language and have answered those questions. The good thing about it is I have his lectures that I can
Yeah,
train
interesting.
and do the summary for. But you and me both know the challenges of
Yeah.
even with just English.
Yeah.
Imagine doing it for this different language which gets mixed around with English words. Like, he uses English words in the
Yeah.
middle very
He uses
casually, and
Hindi.
it's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the challenge that I'm working with. If anyone on your podcast would help me out in this problem, please feel free to reach out to me. More than happy to do this problem. But that's what I'm trying to create, his LLM, so that his knowledge from his words remain, so that not people have to translate it or get their own views. You can, in some sort of a way, listen from himself what he was trying to say, instead of me giving you his knowledge.
Yeah.
You get his knowledge from him directly. I'm not the person who is coming into the middle to translate and bring my bias. You
Brilliant.
get the most translated information available.
How can people get in touch with you if they're interested?
LinkedIn would be the best possible way, and yeah, we can take it from there.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Likewise, always a fun. Have a good one.